Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of our interview series. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy and looking forward to what I'm sure is a very well-deserved weekend. So don't forget, as always, we like to make these sessions interesting and interactive, so please do introduce yourself and share your own story. So before we get started today, I want to do a few quick points about upcoming events we have at ODSC as well as AI+. So let me share this quick slide with you. We do have two free webinars coming up. One is on March 17th on geospatial modeling, and the next one is on March 22nd on time series forecasting. And on March 25th, we will continue our interview series with well-known ODSC speaker Mona Cahill. And then, as you can see on our slide deck there, on March 30th, we have John Crone, who will continue his excellent deep learning bootcamp on AI+. He's currently, I believe, on course 3 of 6. Those 3 will be on demand, and the other 3 will be live. And again, that's March 30th. So our big announcement is that ODSC East is back in person. It's actually hybrid. It'll be in person and online. So you can come down and join us at the Heinz Convention Center if you're in the New England or Boston area. And by the way, you can use your phone to capture those QR codes. But paid passes are available. But of course, as always, we have a bunch of free passes. So do come check out our expo hall and all the other good stuff we have going on there. And also, of course, I want to mention the most popular question we tend to get in this show is like, will it be recorded? Yes, it will. It'll be on our AI Plus platform. And again, remember, there's hundreds of free sessions on there. So you can check out this interview and other ones going back quite a while. So I believe that's all our slides. Now on to our main event. So we're all very familiar with various stats methods such as descriptive statistics, which help us profile, analyze, and summarize our data. And that's a very important part of the machine learning process. We've described that many times in the show. Today we're going to switch gears to discuss cause and effect, or more specifically, causal inference. And now this, as some of you may know, has been a very hot topic and gaining a lot of traction in the community because being able to make causal claims is a key skill and very much in demand. Now, to help us better understand causal inference, I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, who is Scott Cunningham, professor of economics at Baylor University, and of course, the author of Causal Inference, the Mixtape. And by the way, Ira did post a link to that. And this book, thanks to the generosity of Scott, is freely available. Please do support him and buy it from Yale Press. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Seamus. Nice to be here.
Awesome to have you. So before we get into the book, Scott, I just want to ask you a quick question. Tell us a little bit about your path to becoming an economist.
So I was in college, actually an English major, and got a first job. Actually wasn't quantitative. It was as a qualitative market research analyst, and didn't know anything about the social sciences. And so I would read methodology papers at night, and somehow I ended up at the University of Chicago's economics working paper series and read Gary Becker, his Nobel Prize speech. He was a professor at Chicago for a long time. He passed away a couple of years ago. And it just really inspired me to want to be an economist. And I found one of his students, David Mustard, who also studied the topics that I liked, but he was a quantitative economist. And so I went to go study with him. And that's kind of how the path happened.
Fascinating. And would love to know, what inspired you to write this book, and where did you come up with the title, Causal Inference, the Mixtape?
Well, the field of causal inference is it's old, but it didn't really become it's like as widespreadly popular in economics in as far as our curriculum went. So it was kind of became, so the people that won the Nobel Prize in November or October, David Card, Hito Embens, and Josh Angris, 2 of them were primarily labor economists, and Hito Embens was an econometrician. But that work they did they were attached to the fields, the microeconomic field stuff. So you would really only get causal inference, and it wasn't even called that. You would only really get it if you could somehow be traced back to Princeton University mid 80s. So their students and their students. And so I never got it in graduate school. Econometrics was my field, and I never heard the word causality one time. I graduated in 07, and we just didn't talk that way. And so, but when I went on the market and was presenting my work, I could just tell that the conversations that were being had by people that I felt like were in that stream, I didn't know that then, but like in the way I spoke, we just were talking past each other. And I just could tell that in order to be successful in my career, I was going to have to figure out what they were talking about and sort of adapt it into my work. And so I just started preparing a class. And in preparing the class, I just kind of would piece together, like little bits from here and little bits from here, and kind of decided in my class on like the chapters of the book. Those were the methods that were really popular. And I guess back in 2017, I got tired of just always assigning articles for the class. I didn't feel like a lot of books were exactly what I needed. And so I decided to write up my lecture notes for my students. But in economics, academic economics, the profession doesn't really reward books. It's like books are really more written by senior people, and it's like Freakonomics and things like that. It's really more for a general audience. So I didn't really think there was a market for the book. So I just posted it on Twitter, and it went viral. And so I didn't really quite realize it would have any kind of appeal to anybody. I just thought it might be fun. I didn't know anything else to do with it. And so I just kept getting thousands and thousands of downloads. And then I got approached by book publishers, and I ended up going with Yale. The reason why I called it the mixtape was because it was free. In rap, in hip hop, it's really common for these things called mixtapes to be distributed. And they're essentially studio level albums, but they're free. So like Chance the Rapper, for a long time, he was just well known for his underground mixtapes. So I was like, well, this is free and it's filled with rap music. And so I thought, because every chapter's kind of got like a prologue that's a line from a hip hop song that kind of, I felt like captured the method of the chapter. And so I was like, well, this is my mixtape, because it was free.
Nice. Maybe when you write the next book, Scott, you can call that maybe the bootleg.
Yeah, right.
Chapter. Yeah, and it's fascinating what you're saying about the causal inference being taught in universities, because certainly when I was going through my engineering program, it didn't come up. And as you said, it's more recent. Now, many of our listeners in this program, some of them may be well versed in this topic, and others not so much. So just to start into this topic gently, let's talk a little bit about what are cause and effect relationships, and why are they so important to understand those relationships?
Cause and effect relationships are based on, you can think about them being connected to policy, either public policy like a minimum wage law or Medicare, or policies that you do for yourself, go to college, or policies within a firm, like an HR policy. It's any kind of disruption to the status quo that, is an action taken. So that's a treatment, is the way we call it in causal inference. We say that we use the medical terminology. It's called, that's a treatment. And causal inference is about trying to deduce, under what conditions can I deduce the impact or the effect of that policy, so that I can sort of remember it and know that in the future, if I do that thing again, then that's what's likely to happen. And so it's really important, like in public policy, it's very important because public policies are extremely expensive, and many of them are. And so, we want to know if they work and by how big they work, because if they don't work, we should reallocate our energy to figuring out something that does work. So there's a lot of trial and error that could go on. And if you can't figure out causal effects, then you're just guessing, or you're basing it on a story in your mind that you hope is realistic. But in the private sector, it's just as important. So, just thinking about things like advertising, right? Like, is paid search advertising, is that going to have any effect on people coming to the website? Does it have any effect on the spending by those people that we're targeting? Or would they have come to the website and spent the same amount of money anyway? And so, knowing the answer to those questions is hugely important, especially for firms that, maybe don't have nearly the deep budgets of your giants, where they can't really afford to be wrong about what they're about to do,
No, absolutely. And it's one of the reasons you see many of the larger firms out there, certainly Google, Netflix, Facebook, actually have whole teams working on causal inference.
Yeah.
And I was shaking my head when you mentioned Google search, because I hope none of my marketing team is listening to this call, but I'm always complaining about Google keyword search, where you're putting your own company keyword in there, and cause and effect. So we're kind of having a causal inference debate every week. We have a marketing meeting. So those of you who are marketers on here, heed those words of Scott very carefully, because trust me, I know from firsthand experience how expensive not understanding that can be. And so Scott, a very almost overused term in this industry is correlation does not mean causality.
Yeah.
So can you help our listeners understand exactly why correlations are unlikely to be reflective of a causal relationship?
Yeah. So it kind of does, causal inference is a framework more than anything. It's a paradigm. It's a model that is of causality, and in history, there's been many of them. So for many people, correlation was that model of causal effects. The dominant framework in science now is based on causality is a comparison between what you observe and what would have happened had a different choice been made, which is called a counterfactual. And the nature of a counterfactual is that, by definition, if you're defining causality as a comparison between something that happened, something that didn't happen, then inherently you don't know what it is. You don't know a causal effect. And so, but that has not stopped statisticians and economists and other social scientists from developing criteria that is, under probability theory, mathematically shown to identify those average causal effects, those average causal effects in large groups of data. And so in those frameworks, those counterfactuals are basically being implicitly estimated under a variety of situations, and the raw correlations that you observe are basically never those basic situations, because one of the main thing that you need for a correlation, a naturally occurring correlation, what you need for it to kind of give you that causal effect is physical experimentation. You need randomization, because what randomization does is, in any correlation, now I have this decomposition in the book, and so in any correlation, you can show that the correlation does have the causal effect in it, but it also has something called selection bias. And what's nice about physical experimentation, the A/B test, is it neuters the selection bias, because the treatment group and the control group are exactly equal. In aggregate, they kind of share all the same characteristics, as well as counterfactuals end up being canceled out. So that doesn't, the conditions under which that occurs is not going to happen with rational humans or rational firms, because what you need is people to be making policy choices for reasons that are completely unrelated to what they think is going to happen when they make those choices. That's called selection on the expected gains from the choice. And rational people choose things because they think it's going to help them. And so whether that's a firm or with a government or a person, and once you sort of recognize that people do things on purpose with the expectation that they're going to gain from it, already the correlations are contaminated.
No, that just brings to mind kind of next question, because definitely, as data scientists, machine learning engineers, we're looking at feature selection, and selection bias is always something we worry about. So obviously, it's a very important skill set for data scientists, machine learning engineers, related roles, to be able to distinguish what are true insights from what is incidental noise.
Right.
Do you think data science programs and are teaching the right skills to do this?
I do. I think that causal inference oftentimes is using the same tools. It might be using regression analysis. More and more, it's using random forest, causal forests. You're using lassos. You're using lots of things that try to address the need to predict the counterfactual. So, you think about how much of machine learning is about trying to get more accurate predictions. And when you think about causal inference, about predicting counterfactuals, you're already kind of in a world where you could imagine these two areas in having a very fruitful conversation with each other. And so, a lot of the cutting edge work in causal inference actually does do a merging of machine learning methods and causal inference. Susan Athey and Hito Embens at Stanford. Hito won the Nobel Prize in October. That's what their work is increasingly is about, merging it. And so that's one thing is, a lot of these tools are being picked up by that community. Also, causal inference has its own computer science tradition, rooted in the work of Yuta Pearl, which is also compatible with the work that I kind of more emphasize in the book, although there's a chapter on Pearl, and Pearl's work kind of does inform each of the chapters. I try to bring them into a constant conversation. So there's that other part too, which is a lot of this is, especially when you're working with the directed acyclic graphs, already kind of intuitive, but then the last piece is all of us are working with large amounts of data, and all of us are trying to become competent experts in coding. And so once you've developed those skills, for people that think and I'm one of those people too, that think primarily in code as opposed to matrix algebra. Causal inference is ultimately, it is an applied method. It's not, it is obviously very abstract and statistical too, but it's causal because it's a mathematical field that's been produced for people trying to make causal claims with actual real world data. It's not just meant to be on the blackboard. And so that's kind of what I associate too with the broad data science community, which is just all of us are kind of very, empirical workers are now very common. And so a lot of us are not, the ivory tower anymore. It's the work, it's the trade of a huge number of people. And so the distance between causal inference and broader prediction-based machine learning and data science is like as small as it's ever been. And it could be even smaller.
No, that's fascinating. You touched on a lot of great points there, and I was just thinking back when I was first learning, various basic models like random forest. The relation between Dan and Causal Inference never kind of came up, but now it's becoming more important to understand that. And by the way, Scott, I just want to pause here for a second. I think one person did mention that the audio is low. So
On me.
no, I think you're good. So sometimes these problems are localized. So if anyone else has low audio, just let us know. But it may be a localized effect.
I'll get closer. Maybe it is.
Yeah,
me.
and we have a ton of people. I see some folks from New Mexico, from Kenya, from around the world. So welcome to the show. And don't forget, I do not want to monopolize the questions here. So if you have a question for Scott or myself, perfect for Scott, please ask it as we continue our conversation here. So we mentioned a couple of models briefly, but can you talk a little bit about what are the most common statistical models used in causal inference?
The A/B test for sure. I mean, especially in the industry, the physical randomized experiment is a paradigm, for thinking about causal inference, and it's in many ways, I'm not going to say it's the most reliable, because that can be controversial to people from that Pearl tradition, that U to Pearl tradition, but it is extremely reliable because it relies on that randomization, and that randomization is nice because it just cancels out all that selection bias situation, which is just, can be very, very dangerous. It can even get the correlations can be even the wrong sign if you, are just using raw correlations. So the physical, experiment, and when you kind of think about how many A/B tests are done in tech and industry, it's probably more A/B tests were probably done in the last 2 years than were ever done in human history before then. I mean, it's like, so the physical experiment has really changed human history, changed medicine, changed agriculture, changed commerce, and changed the social sciences. But oftentimes the A/B test can't be done. It's not because it can't be imagined. It's not that it can't be designed, but oftentimes it's not ethical. You're not going to get permission. You lack the resources. It's viewed as too disruptive, unfair. There's all kinds of things that.
Give us some concrete examples of that, like
so maybe Uber. So perhaps Uber has a product that they want to release on an A/B test, but it's like a geographic product because their product is has spatial dimensions. Well, to switch on and off, in certain areas, that program might be too disruptive for the customer, depending on the nature of the randomization. You could imagine wanting to know the impact of the quality of the quality of a host at Airbnb, right? Well, you're not gonna be able to randomize that. You're not gonna be able to randomize reputations, right, of a host because it has, real ramifications for hosts' profitability. If you're just going to randomly assign low quality scores, there's no way. You can absolutely design that experiment. It's trivial to imagine the experiment. You're never going to be able to do it. So because that's an example of it being revolt. So viewed as so completely unfair that nobody would do it. So, but if it's but you can still imagine that is a crucially important question, right? Like, what is the impact of a host that is doing a very, very poor job of meeting the needs of the guest? Because maybe when they do a poor job, the guest leaves the platform completely, stops using Airbnb. So, how do we address that? Well, first of all, we just want to know if it's true, right? And so if you can't run the A/B test and you want to know if it's true, then the kinds of things that are in my book have been used for decades in the social sciences, and especially pioneered by the people that won the Nobel Prize in October and many of their students. Many of them go back, some of these methods go back a century, some of them are newer. And increasingly, they've been used, especially as the economists and the social scientists have kind of made their march into tech. They've kind of spread that gospel of causal inference. So it's like Amazon, is the world's largest economics department. There's more people that are PhD economists in Amazon than there are anywhere. In any federal government department, in any department in the world. And so they're constantly doing A/B tests, constantly, training in it. And although it doesn't originate with them too, but some of the natural experiment methodologies completely do. And so they'll use, Netflix will use difference in differences. Advertising companies will use difference in differences. Many companies are using regression, discontinuity, synthetic control. All these things are really nice when you don't feel that the A/B test can be done. And so the natural experiments, as they're sometimes called, are nice, even if they're going to be used as evidence to later do the A/B test. That was one thing that was done at eBay. There was a natural experiment done where they turned off paid search advertising on one search engine, but not all of them. And they found certain they found certain compelling patterns from that then went to do the A/B tests.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah. No, amazing insights, Scott, as always. So I should be on the lookout for Amazon getting the Nobel Prize for.
Hito Emmons and David Card were Amazon who won in October were actually Amazon scientists.
Actually, no, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So like, just thinking here, one of the main goals of causal analysis is to understand how one variable causally influences another, right? Of course. Now, in your book, you describe the Frontdoor criterion.
Yeah.
And give an excellent example. So, can you expand upon that?
Yeah. The Frontdoor criterion is a method of estimating a causal effect that is very hard for it to occur in the what I'll just call the outside of commerce, outside of tech in particular. The things that you need in order for it to happen is a particular kind of almost like a triangle structure of a system. And you've sort of got some confounder, some unobserved confounder that's creating a major problem for estimating a causal effect. But you've got a treatment, you've got a mechanism, and then you've got an outcome. And if you have that triangle, confounder, treatment, mechanism, outcome, and it's a closed system like that, you can use you can identify each of them in pieces and then combine them. And so one of the classic examples is wanting to know the effect of tobacco smoking, tobacco smoking on lung cancer. Now, the problem is, doing the RCT, you can imagine, here's a great example, doing the randomized control trial on smoking, right? If I get assigned personally to the treatment group, I'm not going to comply because I am not a smoker and I don't care what, some experimenter tells me. And you can imagine a heavy smoker getting assigned to the control group that doesn't comply. So it's like, not only is it maybe unethical, but it might also just be difficult to get compliance. That's the problem with humans, is that they resist treatment all the time. But Yuta Pearl, in his book, The Book of Why, as well as a book by Morgan and Winship, they note that there's this confounder, whatever it is. It could be genetic. It could be like some unobserved factor that causes you to smoke and might be itself responsible for lung cancer. And that was for a long time. Statisticians just kept saying that, which is like, you can't say this is causal. even though there's this strong correlation because it's not random, and people could just have this, genetic predisposition to smoke and also have a genetic predisposition to get lung cancer.
Yeah.
But Pearl notes, that smoking appears to cause tar in the lungs, and the tar is itself the cause of the lung cancer. And he kind of notes that you can do these in pieces. And if you do these in pieces, if you've got that closed system, it itself can identify the causal effect of the smoking, even though you do not. I mean, he shows it. And
right.
he shows that this is, mathematically true, even under this counterfactual theory of causality. Well, it's really hard to get that because that like isolated mechanism is sometimes kind of hard to defend in the real world. But it's interesting because in industry on tech, they have so many ways in tech, with their apps to kind of filter people through, certain exposures that sometimes that actually does hold in the design of the system. And so you have to kind of recognize. So a lot of these causal inference designs, you kind of have to learn the design. It's almost like learning machine learning, although it's in some ways it's simpler.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily statistical in nature. It's more about these DAGS structures. And when you kind of are familiar with these DAGS structures, you become indoctrinated basically to just like look for them. And and as you're familiar with them, you're sort of thinking, if only I could find a system that met the Frontdoor criterion, then I could isolate this effect. And a recent group did it with Uber, trying to isolate the effect of tipping, or it was actually a particular policy that Uber did, and its effect on, and it had to do with tipping, and look at the effect of tipping on some driver impact. Well, the way that Uber structured the entire thing, which was not to help anybody to identify a causal effect, but it was like that mechanism was just all by itself. Nothing else could be affecting it except the treatment because of the way that Uber designed it. And the Frontdoor criterion is just an extremely powerful methodology that's probably all over the place in tech, and anything with platforms that is probably not used. It's very rare. There's that paper I talked about. It's the only paper I've ever seen in the social sciences that even attempted it. And so, because like right now, the evidence for it is all theoretical. So learning these designs it's not trivial to learn the designs. It's not a trivial exercise because you have to kind of understand why this method works, even though there's no physical randomization. And there's a whole set of tests that are not necessarily intuitive to somebody that doesn't understand the design, but which make a tremendous amount of sense when you do understand the design.
No. This is absolutely fascinating insight, Scott. And I love the way you tied the lung cancer example back to your initial comments about policy at the top of this interview. And I remember years ago, the name of the documentary escapes me, but back when they had the whole lung cancer debate, they were basically rolling out scientists, which in fact statisticians, arguing over different methods, as you just described. So it goes to show you the importance of this and how things are not clear cut. But you did actually touch upon DAGs. DAGs are widely used in data engineering. We use them in Airflow. They're widely used in machine learning and good stuff. So you have a whole chapter dedicated to DAGs and graphical modeling for causal inference in your book. Can you touch upon that if you have time?
Yeah. So there's two traditions. I guess that's not true, but there's like in the history of causal inference, which goes back millennia. Even the Greek philosophers were trying to figure it out. Right. So there's lots of ideas that have been presented. But the like I said, the kind of the dominant philosophy of science, and in the sciences in general, all of the sciences, they've kind of settled on this like counterfactual theory. But there's this group that primarily comes out of the physical experimentation tradition, going back to the 1920s, who in that group was a group of statisticians that invented the physical experiment, Ronald Fisher and Jerzy Neiman, and it kind of moved into the social sciences through a man named Don Rubin, who probably was the fourth or fifth person on the Nobel list for the October, but they only give it to 3. So, he's a very influential, he's a co-author of these guys. He's a former chair of the statistics department at Harvard, very, very influential. But all of these causal assumption, all these like causal methods, like have inside them these assumptions, like parallel trends in differences, or smoothness in regression discontinuity, or independence, which is like another name for randomization in the RCT. So like there's all these things inside all of them, and you can't ultimately test them. So that's kind of one of the things that makes causal inference so unusual is that it's like driven by beliefs. Like you've got to have like a core belief that this parallel trends assumption, whatever it means, is like a credible belief, right? So like, why is the A/B test so credible? Well, because we know how randomization works. We know probability theory. We've known it for 100 years. So I know what randomization does, right? Well, there's some things that's not true. So Yuta Pearl's work, he was the Turing Award winner, which is the Nobel Prize in computer science, effectively, I think in like 2011 or 2014. His work is also based on the counterfactual theory of causality. He's got a great book, The Book of Why. He's got another book, Causality. Highly recommend those books. And he kind of shows that to identify these causal effects, you absolutely need to have prior beliefs. It's not quite Bayesian, but it is like a statement that I need a theory. I need a reason to believe these assumptions, because all of these assumptions are based on the ability to draw those arrows, in that graph, but also to not draw certain arrows. And that's a belief, to say that two nodes are actually are independent of each other or don't have a direct edge. Why would you do that? Why would you not do that? Why did you do some but not others? Well, you've got a theory, right? And where does that theory come from? Expertise, literature, prior science, right? Observation, common sense, instinct, your own familiarity with these things. And so in industry, I keep talking about industry because I really do think that causal inference in industry, where it's relatively newer, is got an unbelievable comparative advantage over the social sciences, even in being able to do credible causal inference. Because oftentimes the data scientist, for instance, or the machine learning engineer, they are experts in their very, very specific firm, market, product, right? And if you need prior theory to make a design and to like say, this is the theory, and my team debates it, and the larger community can confirm whether or not that's believable or not, and you use it to then go, okay, I'm going to go do matching, or I'm going to go do difference in differences, or I'm going to do synthetic control. Then like you're in the data science machine learning community or the product manager community, they're experts. They know if that theory is at all believable, right? And so DAGs are a way of just keeping everybody honest, keeping everybody on the same page, and making it very clear, what are you assuming? Because if you are not making assumptions like that satisfy the backdoor criterion, then if it doesn't satisfy the backdoor criterion, which backdoor criterion is a particular DAG structure with a particular set of covariates that are in a particular data set. And if you cannot satisfy the backdoor criterion, you have no business at all using matching, which is commonly used all the time in lots of areas. And the DAG gives you permission or absolutely says absolutely not. And so what's nice about DAGs too, the thing about, and this is just like, what's nice about DAGs is, DAGs is a language. It's a graphical language. And, I could give that language. I could give that language to like a fifth grader, a sixth grader, and say, what do you think this is saying? And they will basically articulate. They will not articulate, obviously, like counterfactuals, and they definitely won't be comfortable with kind of mathematical notation that the potential outcomes notation that I also talk about in the book. But they'll kind of say, they'll say probably this thing is doing something to the other thing, especially if they recognize the words. So that's what's really nice about DAGs is it is so simple to communicate your point. And in a meeting with someone, right? In a meeting with someone, putting a DAG up on a slide, and all we do is debate the DAG, and we get that DAG, we agree on that DAG, going to the designs, and then going to the selection of the appropriate statistical estimator is almost not even the hard part.
No, that's an excellent description of DAGs and overview of it. But you mentioned this a couple of times, just describing DAGs. Definitely one of the most popular methods in the world of quasi-experiments, differences, right? So can you give us a quick overview of the method and its importance, since you mentioned it quite a few times?
Yeah. So this is one of the most famous maps in the history of the visualization of data. You think about data visualization being very popular. This is really one of the first ones, because what this is a map of a neighborhood in London, and those little black dots are cholera deaths. And at the time in the 1850s, there were 3 massive outbreaks of cholera, and in the 1850s, they had never seen a microorganism before. The resolution on the microscopes were not very good. They wouldn't be good for a long time. It'd be another 70 years before we'd ever see a little bug. So, they had diseases, and it's a fairly advanced time in human history. And they have diseases. And so what did they think about cholera? Well, they thought it was actually spread through vapors that were smelled bad. They thought it was smelly air, which, London is absolutely disgusting in the 1850s. They've got like cesspools, and it's just, foul. And so it's not crazy theory, because like if you think wretched, disgusting, maggot-filled food is probably, responsible for a disease, you're, 9 times out of 10, that's not a bad theory, even if you're wrong about the mechanism. Well, that's not helping, though, any of these doctors and these public health people to address cholera, because cholera was not coming from the smelly air. And this guy, John Snow, he had been working on the front line. He was an anesthesiologist. He had invented a machine that safely delivered chloroform, which was like the first anesthesia in the history of surgery. Hugely impactful. And he's been working for 30 years on the front line of treating cholera patients, and he doesn't believe the smelly air hypothesis at all. He's got his own theory. He's never even seen a bug. He's never even seen a microorganism. He says, no, that's not the reason. The reason is because we are ingesting things with water and food that have these small bugs in them. They're going into the stomach, and they are then replicating and expelling poison, and it's expelling water, creating poison, expelling water until the host dies. And so that's that's basically accurate. He's never even seen the organism. And that's basically accurate.
Amazing, yeah.
Then he says, and then the water, the waste is going into the Thames River, which is the source of the water supply in London. and then the water utility companies got their pipes planted in the Thames River downstream. And so it's like, where all the waste is, even though they've got filters, it's not that they're not filtering, they just can't filter out microorganisms.
Exactly.
And so they're drinking cholera. And so you get these massive epidemics. And so there was this one this one pipe here in Broad Street. You can still go there, the Broad Street pump, rather, where it's circulating. But his really compelling evidence was difference in differences, which did not exist. He's just a genius. He's just a profoundly important scientist that should inspire everybody. He has this idea. He's paying attention. He's actually reading the newsletters from the water utility companies because he thinks it's coming from the water utility companies, and he's not going to be able to get them to do this. And there's no RCTs, there's no A/B tests, because physical experimentation is still 75 years away.
Yes.
So he says, but then he discovers this thing. All of a sudden he learns that London has passed an ordinance between two of the epidemics, 1849 and 1854. And the ordinance said everybody's got to move their pipes upstream, but one company didn't do it. For some reason, they delayed. They hadn't done it by 1854. And that company was called Suffolk and Vauxhall, and this other company called Lambeth did move it. And they both serviced the exact same neighborhood. It was a big neighborhood. It's like, I don't know, it was like either tens or 100,000 houses. And just like this jagged path through the neighborhoods of just like, one set of street, one set of households would be at Lambeth, across the street would be Suffolk and Vauxhall. And so he did difference in differences. He observed cholera mortality. He actually merged the mortality records from the city of London to each of the neighborhoods, figuring out where they were being served. It's like the sheer shoe leather that went into this. And this is like data scientists, I think, would be inspired by this, because it's just the handling of the data, and just like being obsessed with quality data is just incredible. He observed it before, he observed it after, and he did difference in differences, which is did it before and after, and did a cross-sectional. And he finds huge reductions in cholera mortality for Lambeth before and after compared to Suffolk and Vauxhall before and after. Of course, as is the case, nobody believed him. But, so it didn't actually influence policy till after he died, because after he died, about 15 years later, there was another epidemic. And then it was just, the evidence was just too overwhelming that Snow was right. And so, these things oftentimes, it's like I was saying, Netflix does difference in differences all the time. They've got on their blog, a story about how they used it. And Uber does them too. And advertising companies do them. So there's just like, it's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly powerful. And probably that's the thing, is like outside of, this like core set of giant tech firms that are doing A/B tests like nonstop. And I know there's a lot of firms that are doing A/B tests like on websites and things, but there's like, like for actually like large scale products, lots of times those get fielded in certain markets at different points in time, or could be, right? Like Tinder could roll out something in a certain market and not do it in others, and it might not be disruptive whatsoever.
Scott, this has been absolutely fascinating. You're a wonderful storyteller, and I hope this gives our listeners a good sense of why your book is such a great read. So we've a ton more questions for you, but unfortunately we're running out of time here. So the last question really is, what are some of the tools that you make available that our listeners can learn and use Causal Inference? Because I know you're on Scholar site. You have some Colab stuff out. Yeah, can you talk about that briefly?
Yeah. So I'm on a startup platform called Scholar Site, and I teach a causal inference class aimed at machine learning engineers and data scientists and product managers. That is going on right now. So I do that. And then I have my own platform called Mixtape Sessions, which you can get if you go to my personal website, or you can Google it, Mixtape Sessions, Scott Cunningham. And I provide my own classes on causal inference as well as classes by other people. But I also target students. So for students of any kind, undergraduate, people in terminal masters, data science, and really anybody, pre-doc, RAs, postdocs, and residents of low and middle income countries, it's only $50 per session. And then for the non-categories, it's $5.95 a person. The hope, is that you're not paying for that. Hopefully your firm is paying for it. And at Scholar Site, it's also $5.95. And so basically, what it is a fairly, it's a condensed multi-day workshop over Zoom and using Discord to chat to go through the main methods of my book and to try to bring it up to a contemporary level. My strength as an instructor, I think, is to make stuff accessible. So I'm not an econometrician. Econometrics was my field, but being an econometrician is to be a very creative statistician that's creating new models, creating synthetic control, creating lasso and things like that. That's not me. I use those things. I'm a consumer of those things. So my job is to teach other people how to be a consumer and user of those things. So in my book, which is free on my website, mixtape.scunning.com, it's neat that this is open source community. My book is open source. So, and I have code both in the physical book, but also online. I have code in a proprietary language that's not really common in the data science community called Stata. It's very common in economics as well as like certain fields, but it's not in data science. But I also have R, which is common in stats. And then I have Python, which is more common in, so I have essentially 3 different ways for you to implement these designs with real data. And all the data is stored at GitHub or it's simulated. And the goal is just because people think in code, that's the conjecture of the book. The book was always on the conjecture that in 2022, people think they start with code, they do stuff, they go back to the code, and then they go read the articles. And then they read the articles, and then they go back to the code, and it's just very interactive. Yeah, and the reason is because causal inference is an applied workers. It's an ordinary person's. It's like an ordinary person's job, right? And so if it's an ordinary person's job, then you got to speak the ordinary person's language, which is programming, and you got to hit all of them. The only one I'm not doing is Julia, but
not yet.
Maybe I'll learn that, and we'll put that in the next book.
Well, Scott, I got to say this certainly was an education for me. So if people have time, please go check out Scott's courses online. Again, excellent education for us. You come across as an excellent instructor, Scott. So would love to have you talk at one of our ODSC conferences in the future. So thank you so much. It was an honor and a pleasure. And congratulations on the book and your great work. And we'll chat again. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me. It was a really honor.
Okay, everybody. I hope everyone has a great weekend. As mentioned, I'm sure it's very well deserved. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks back on our interview series. Bye for now.